I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 301 of the Brilliant Balance podcast, real talk about menopause and women's health with Lisa Larkin, MD. So you are in for an absolute treat today. This interview with Dr. Lisa Larkin is one of my favorite interviews in a long time on the show. I am so delighted to be able to share her perspective with you. And Dr. Larkin and I actually go back kind of a long way. I first met her back when I was running my first business, Nourish, and she had just started a women's health practice. And we had a shared vision of the role that better nutrition could play in women's health and well-being. And then I moved from that business into Brilliant Balance, and she has gone on to do a lot of things, as you are about to hear in this episode. Her bio is really extensive, and I'm going to get into some pieces of it. But one fun fact to pull out is that as I was doing my research for this episode, I found an interview where she was interviewed by Maria Shriver on her show called Above the Noise. And they were talking about the very same subject that we are talking about today. So many of you as listeners, I know, are asking questions about perimenopause and menopause and women's health in general. And Dr. Larkin's is a voice that we really want in the mix as we navigate these waters. So Lisa Larkin is a 1988 graduate of Yale University School of Medicine. And then she completed her internal medicine residency at the University of Chicago in 1991. She is a fellow of the American College of Physicians. She is certified as a menopause clinician by the North American Menopause Society, and she's a fellow of and serves on the board of directors of the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. She spent the first 10 years of her career as an academic faculty member in the internal medicine department at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. And then she left and opened her own internal medicine and women's health practice, which is operated for 10 years in Cincinnati. And then she successfully opened the UC, which is University of Cincinnati, the UC Health Women's Center, which was a giant center within the university medical system focused exclusively on women's health. And she served as their director there for a few years before she returned back to private practice. And she's been running private practice ever since 2016. She is a breast cancer survivor herself, and her passion is women's health, particularly menopause management, female sexual health, cancer survivorship, breast cancer risk assessment and prevention, and women and cardiovascular disease. She lives in Cincinnati, where I do, with her husband and their blended family of 6 children. So you're going to hear us in this conversation get into a number of topics related to women's health and honestly, some of the history of how we got to the place in the state of affairs of women's health overall, which I think is fascinating. Also, we talk about the difference between the perimenopausal and menopausal hormonal effects versus just aging. Okay. And so there really are, as we're experiencing a range of symptoms during this life stage, some which are explained more by the hormonal shifts and some which are explained strictly by the aging process. And she is truly an expert in helping us tease those apart. We talk a little bit about some other health conditions that correlate with this same life stage, and specifically breast cancer, which, as I mentioned, is a passion area of hers. And here's what I loved most about this interview. So one thing to note, we did this in front of a live audience. I was in a Zoom webinar with her while we were recording, and I had some of our clients kind of off camera listening and chatting along. And then they had the chance to ask some questions at the end. So you'll hear us reference the chat a couple times during this interview. What was so powerful during the interview, as well as the Q&A that we had off recording later, was the specificity of the questions as they related to symptoms. So if you're listening to this episode because you're like, I don't know, I have some symptoms going on that seem kind of wacky. I don't really feel like myself, but I'm not sure that they're attributable to anything related to perimenopause or menopause. Or maybe you're not even sure what those clinically mean. This is the episode for you, because I think what's happening to a lot of women in their 40s, which is typically the era you're going to hear her say when we are in perimenopause, and in their 50s, which is typically the era where we're in menopause, the things that are happening seem like this disparate collection of symptoms. They don't necessarily feel like there's a thread tying them together. And I think what you're going to hear her do with a lot of expertise and experience is explain what is tying them together, and also kind of symptom by symptom, what can we do about it and what do we want to watch out for? Because if your social media feeds are anything like mine, you're getting flooded with a lot of people who want to sell you a lot of stuff related to relieving some of these symptoms. And I think we have to be, and you'll hear her echo this, we have to be particularly careful about to whom will we listen, right? Because we are so desperate for help in some of these symptoms that we will buy anything. And I think we want to be really careful and discerning and listen to the experts. So I, was saying, not only do I want people who have read the peer-reviewed journals and are looking at evidence-based medicine, I want the people who wrote them. And that is exactly what we are bringing you in this interview with Dr. Lisa Larkin. So kick back, relax, enjoy the things that you're about to learn, see what applies to you. And then I am linking up in the show notes additional resources that she references during this episode so that you can go if you want to find like an NCMP certified physician, if you want to check out the resources at menopause.org, which is the website for the organization that she is running these days called the Menopause Society. So this is a topic that I think is kind of coming out of the closet. We don't talk about it a lot, and it's hard to know who to ask to get information. So I am so delighted to bring you this interview because it is packed with really, really useful, practical information that I hope helps you feel a whole lot better in short order. All right, without further ado, here is my interview with Dr. Lisa Larkin. All right, well, Dr. Lisa Larkin, welcome to the Brilliant Balance podcast.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Do you want me to call you Lisa throughout today or Dr. Larkin?
I sure do. You can call me Lisa.
Excellent. Well, I am so glad to have you, and I would love you to get us started by just telling the listeners, what are you up to today? What was on your calendar before this? Where are you headed afterward?
So Wednesdays and Fridays are my non-clinical day. So today started with team photos. So for my whole practice,
Wow.
I'm going to open a new practice location in Mason in September. So I have a new physician that's just joining my practice here in Cincinnati. And so we just needed some group photos with her included now. So busy morning already this morning.
Yes. Well, and this is always a good sign to know your team will change again, because every time we take team photos, something changes.
Right. Well, that is absolutely the truth.
Yes.
And actually, one of my most senior physician partner, she came over this morning and she's like, okay, every time I come, I tell you this is the last time I'm taking pictures. This time really is the last time I'm
really not doing
pictures.
this anymore. Right. And you said you have a couple family members working from home today. So like all of us, sharing the Wi-Fi.
I do. Yes. So my husband is working from home. He's emergency medicine physician, chair of emergency medicine at UC. And my son is a computer software engineer at Dropbox, and he's here because he's leaving tomorrow with his high school friends to do an Ironman. So he flew in from New York to get his bike and leave. So I do have two people, including me, working from home today.
Oh my goodness. Where's the Ironman?
Someplace in Michigan, 5-hour drive away. So
that's so
yes.
fun. We have a couple of triathletes in our community, our coaching community. And I'm so in awe of it. I always say, I'm so afraid of swimming. I think that's my downfall. I couldn't do it. So,
right. I actually give my son a lot of credit. He was never a great swimmer. And when he got into this, when he was in Chicago, before he was in New York, he really took lessons actually to get his swimming up to speed. So that's still his weak spot, but
impressive nonetheless.
To be 27 again.
I know, right? So great. Well, we are here today to talk with you about kind of the other side of the aging curve, I think. And we're going to talk all about menopause. And I was saying to you before we went live that I think The reason I want to talk about this is I feel like menopause is coming out of the closet. And maybe it's just because of the age and life stage I'm 48, that it's on my radar and I'm hearing a lot about it in my social media feeds, but I feel like it's having a moment. And because our listenership is kind of sitting in this perimenopausal, early menopausal life stage, I think it's a hot topic that we don't always know where to turn to get good information. So I was really grateful to have you accessible for this.
Thank you.
Because you're definitely an expert in this territory. So tell us a little bit about why women's health, credential yourself a little bit for us. So
right. So I think fundamentally what you have to think about as a patient, as a consumer, is who really owns women's health, right? And I think for a long time, we've really thought of women's health just as OBGYNs. And the problem is OBGYNs are great and they certainly do a lot of women's health. But as women age, you're not seeing your OBGYN, you're beyond your childbearing years. And menopause kind of falls in this weird gap where women are typically done childbearing. So they're not seeing their OB very much anymore, but they're not really sick enough yet to see an internal medicine doctor. They don't have hypertension or diabetes. And so they fall through this gap with very few points of contact with the healthcare community. And so very early in my career, which is now I've been practicing for 32 years as an internist, right? It was very clear that midlife women were falling through the cracks. And it's really from the very beginning of my career, it was clear that there was this unmet need. And so really led me to get all this advanced credentialing in menopause and female sexual dysfunction. And now I'm into high-risk breast and hereditary cancer genetics. But it really is, the time of life, and it has come to the forefront in the last several years. But this is really something that I've been doing for the last 30 years, right? As the data has really evolved over time now. And I think to your point about where women turn, it's difficult to sort out what's evidence-based information and what really is what we as physicians should be practicing, clinical practice guidelines, and really what's a lot of TikTok videos and a lot of the anecdotal stuff. And how do you actually sort out what really you should be doing in this information overload? And so I'm really involved in our big national menopause organization. It's currently called the North American Menopause Society, but we just did a name change and it's now the Menopause Society. But it is the place I would encourage all of your listeners to go to look for evidence-based information and clinicians who are involved in the field.
We will link that up for sure. So the Menopause Society would be the place to go, and I'll get the URL.
Yes. Yep. Great. Menopause.org.
Okay, perfect. Good branding. I hope they got their hands on that one. So I think you're so right that where people are going is social media, which is terrifying, right? Because we end up in this echo chamber of kind of pseudoscience and a lot of people who want to sell you a lot of things that may or may not be helpful. I don't know, some of them might be helpful, but I really want to make sure we're staying super grounded in the science of this. So let's start slowly and maybe have you define menopause for us and how it differs from perimenopause.
Right. So I will define that, but I want to step back 1 second to just explain a little bit of what I think the problem is with women's health in the social media space, is that now there are doctors who are now thought leaders and a lot of people in the social media space. And it's amazing for me to watch now that doctors, young physicians, are actually sometimes getting their information from social media themselves, but certainly that's where consumers are. But from the big professional organizations, the American College of Physicians, ACOG, the Menopause Society now, our focus is not disseminating information via social media, right? Our focus has been peer-reviewed publications based on science and developing clinical practice guidelines. But now those are not what's in the forefront of the mainstream media. So consumers aren't actually getting that information. They're getting social media information, which is very hard to sort out the positives from the negatives. So that I really do think part of my big annual meeting that I'm doing in September for the organization, there's a whole session now on what we're doing in this space with disinformation and misinformation. And so again, but long answer, I'll go back to what is menopause and what is perimenopause. So by definition, menopause is no menstrual bleeding for 12 months. The average age in the United States is 51. But there's a wide bell-shaped curve. So natural menopause can happen for some women in the early to mid 40s. And I just have a patient I saw this week who was 56 and still having menstrual periods, right? So it's a big bell-shaped curve, but 51 is the average time. And again, for some women who've had an endometrial ablation, like sometimes it's hard to tell, right? Because you haven't had periods after an endometrial ablation. But the true definition is no menstrual bleeding for 12 months. And the question comes up often about all of these hormone testing, which we can get into. And I can tell you that we don't use hormone testing, again, with rare exception, nothing is 100% in medicine, to define menopause. It's really no menstrual bleeding for 12 months. Perimenopause is this time prior to that final menstrual period. And if you're 48, you're likely to be in it now, although I know nothing about you, of course, health-wise,
right.
of course. But it is the time when basically you can think of it as the time when the ovaries are starting to get old and not function very well. So you probably know that at birth, we have all of the eggs that we're ever going to have. During the peak reproductive years of the 20s and the 30s, and really up until about 40, the ovaries are working very well. Cycles are very consistent. Pretty much every cycle, women are ovulating, and women really know their cycles. The perimenopause can be broken into early perimenopause and late perimenopause, but it's really when the ovaries are just starting to have difficulty producing hormones in any kind of consistent way. The quality of the eggs aren't as good. You're not ovulating every cycle. Cycle length starts to change. Bleeding patterns start to change. And women notice symptoms. I'm sure that you do. You notice you just don't feel the way that you used to feel. And sometimes it can be starting to have sleep disturbance, or it can be starting to notice fatigue more prior to your period, or moodiness. Like many times women start to, for the first time, have, and I see it all the time, the first episode of mild depression, the first episode of having difficulty with anxiety. Some of it's related to sleep disturbance, but it's just very subtle changes at first. And as you get closer to that final menstrual period, many women start having intermittent hot flashes and night sweats. It can be very variable. Sometimes it correlates with their period just prior to them getting their period. But what's happening is the ovaries are just all over the map about producing hormones now.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's
leading up to the end,
all over again.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's cartoons that call it puberty part 2, and it really is real. And I think one of the things prior to menopause and perimenopause really coming into the forefront and with the increase in social media and availability of information is just, women really suffered in silence. And it was really poorly understood for a long time that the mood disturbance and the sleep disturbance is directly correlated with these big hormonal changes, right? And it's not just in your head, right? It's not, it's real. There's a physiologic basis for it. And women shouldn't just be patted on the back and say, you just need to take a vacation,
right,
or meditate.
I think there's going to be a lot of women like fist pumping in their cars as they hear you say that, because the validation is so real of you're not making this up and yet it's a subtle collection of seemingly disconnected symptoms. And so being able to kind of pull a thread through this and say, actually, there is something kind of at this life stage tying together these seemingly disparate symptoms, right? I think beyond the ones you mentioned, the other ones we hear about all the time would be like belly bloat or weight gain.
Yep.
And also like thinning hair or dry skin.
Yes.
And so they're all
100%. They're all real. And I can get into those as well. And you're right. That is, I see patients day in and day out, and that is what they're complaining about. And I like to tell my patients, and I'm happy to tell the audience, right? I'm living still my patient population now. I'm about to turn 60, so I'm postmenopausal, but
she looks 40, like for sure.
No, yeah. Breast cancer survivor myself, and have been through all of the things that I do, right? Mm-hmm. And have all of these both survivorship issues and postmenopausal health related issues. So I really relate to all of this, right? One of the things I think in this space that still gets neglected is kind of education of the men. Because what I like to say is men and women age very differently. And that's one of the things that men don't actually understand, right? So men kind of have this pattern of aging, and it relates to kind of slowly declining testosterone levels over time. But it's slow and gradual, and it's very even. And they don't really have these periods of time where things change so dramatically. And so for women that have had pregnancies and then are postpartum, right? Like that's a time of huge hormonal changes after delivery, right? And there's all kinds of things that I think are being talked about more now, like vaginal dryness after you have a baby. And why are you having that when you're breastfeeding, right? These big hormonal changes. But women notice aging kind of after delivery, right? Like I think everybody kind of notices they don't look exactly the same. They may even notice when they're breastfeeding that they have more skin wrinkling, right? And it's really related to these hormonal changes. And then in the perimenopause and menopause, women describe it as kind of feeling like they fall off a cliff, like they're aging so quickly. And women don't like that. And I can tell you, I used to say that I was the least vain person that I know. Well, let me just tell you, I was smoking dope because I was the least vain person I knew until I started to age. And then I don't like it any more than anyone else, right? The hair loss and the wrinkles and the dry skin and the slower healing of all my little nicks and the spots all over my legs and the crepey skin and all that kind of stuff is really real. And it happens very suddenly. That's the thing. So.
Yeah, it does feel like this is, I would say, the narrative that we're hearing in our coaching community. And so you have to be in pretty close to people to have these conversations. You're not going to strike up a chat with somebody at the bus stop, right? But when you're in relationship with other women, if you're listening, whether they're your good friends, whether they're family members, in our case, our client community that's pretty open with each other, there is this kind of revealing of this notion of a cliff, that it feels like all of a sudden, boom, there it is, and things are changing very rapidly. So can you speak to that, what that compression of those symptoms arriving?
Right. Well, so it really does largely, but not entirely relate to, again, the ovarian changes that you're having relatively abruptly. Now, again, some people who go much more gradually through that late perimenopause, they don't notice it as abruptly, but there's variability in how long women are in perimenopause and how quickly they will enter into having no estrogen around, right? And what we know from me, for example, who had chemotherapy-induced menopause, or women who have surgical menopause, the abruptness of menopause does really correlate with the very abrupt change in symptoms and the things that you're talking about, right? So the belly bloat and the change in your waist. I mean, I can tell you from personal experience. I mean, I got chemotherapy and I went into menopause, and 6 months, the scale didn't change at all. Like I hadn't really gained weight, but I had like a thing over my jeans now, like a roll. Like I had never had that before.
Wasn't there.
And we know, right. And it's really physiologic. Like it's not just in the skin where it's this whole shift in where women are depositing fat. So no longer are you putting fat into your thighs and your buttocks. Now it goes into your abdomen. And it's not just in the skin. Right? I know, not just in your skin, right? It's all intra-abdominal. Like when you open a belly, a surgeon opens a belly to do surgery, like there's fat sitting on the omentum and the liver and the kidneys, and it's all inside. And the other important thing for women at menopause is we start to get fat around the heart, which is one of the things that it's associated with a rapidly accelerating cardiovascular risk. And so again, it's hormonal driven. We in the menopause world work very hard to sort out what's age-related changes versus what's hormone-related changes. And I think that's really important because I think there's a lot of misinformation in the social media world right now that if you just fix your hormones, like all of this goes away.
Better, right.
And it doesn't all go away. Okay. So I'm a big advocate of hormones, even as a breast cancer survivor in the right patient. But again, it's not aging. There is aging that's happening independent of entering menopause. But again, during the transition, it's really bumpy, and hormones can be very, very helpful for all of these symptoms, including the hair loss too, that you mentioned.
Yes. So if I paraphrase this, you're not going to necessarily stave off every symptom because some of them are related simply to the aging process.
Yes.
But the ones that are related to this kind of seismic fluctuation of hormones can maybe be smoothed out a bit by therapy. Okay.
Absolutely.
Great.
And I think the big thing for your listeners is two things that I would say just in general. One, not all hormones are bad. Not all hormones are bad. There is a place for using hormones. Hormones can be very, very beneficial. There's a way to do bioidentical hormones using prescription hormones. You don't have to do these pellets, which we can talk about. But the other piece is not all women need to take hormones because not everyone really has things that, I mean, some women sail through menopause, right? And so but hormones are not all bad, is the key thing to remember.
Yeah. And I think that's an important headline because, again, if social media is where people are getting a lot of their misinformation, you're going to get both sides of it. The kind of hormone pushers, like you got to do it, and then the don't ever do it. And so I think getting to this place of where are you going to go to get level-headed wisdom from true experts who this is the field of study they're in, they're reading the peer-reviewed journals, they're writing the peer-reviewed journals. Like That's who I want to get. My audience has heard me say this 1,000 times. When I don't know about something, I'm going straight to an expert because it's the shortcut to like certainty, right? I don't want to read 6,000 things on the internet. I want to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing and then like listen well, you know? So,
right. And part of what's happened in this space, unfortunately, is that there aren't a lot of us when I say that, right? And I count myself in this. I mean, I've been doing in this space, living and breathing menopause science for 30 years now. But the problem is there aren't very many of us. And there's lots of reasons for that relate to our broken healthcare system, which I could go on and on about. But what that has led to is really women who are suffering. They see their family medicine physician or they see their internal medicine physician because they're not seeing their gynecologist. And even sometimes if they see their gynecologist and they're having some of these symptoms and they really get patted on the back and told, you know what, take some supplements and it'll get better. Estrogen's not safe. You should just kind of go along your life. And so women then look to, well, I feel terrible. So the doctor's not helping me. Like, where do I go? And now you go to social media and you may end up in what I call these more alternative hormone centers, which I can talk about. And there's a lot of non-evidence-based things going on in the space that I have great concern about and our organizations have great concern about, but we have very little ability to impact it because it really is the business of medicine. When you have vulnerable women who are suffering with symptoms, who aren't getting answers from traditional healthcare because their doctors aren't trained or interested in this space, you turn to where you can find help. And then the business side transitions in, which is when desperate people you can sell things to, right? I use the weight loss as a good analogy.
An example. Well, and I immediately think of like opioids. It's the same dynamic of you have desperate people who will do anything to get relief and not great access to better options, you know, and it becomes a business. So it's real. I think this is a definite like yellow light, proceed with caution, get to an expert. Might not be the easiest person to find, but they are out there. And that's kind of what I have a couple questions before we get to what to do about
it. I did see some things in the chat too about the pellets too.
And there's a grounding thing for me that's important, which is this notion of being able to, how important is it that an individual is able to determine sort of where they are in this process? Because, for example, you said definition of menopause is no bleeding for a year. Well, if you have an IUD, you may not be bleeding.
Right. That's the other thing.
How do we get to certainty on where we are?
Well, and this is very hard. So let me tell you that the way we know where you are is based on symptoms. And so there's this question of, should you be getting your hormone levels checked? There's a lot of business in getting all of these hormone levels checked. And the issue I really explain is it's like checking your blood sugar, right? So your blood sugar when you're fasting is one thing. And then when you eat a big meal or you have a milkshake, and you check it right after, it's very different. And in this perimenopausal period of time, you can measure it on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and get completely different results. I mean, even hour to hour, you can get different results, right? And so it's just not reliable, right? Wow. So the issue is you can, and I get patients who come to see me for consults, right? Who say, well, look, you know, my GYN or my family medicine physician or my internist checked my estrogen level and my FSH and tells me I'm not menopausal. Okay, you're not menopausal, but I'm having all these symptoms. Like, okay, you still are producing some estrogen, but it doesn't tell you anything about where you are in the transition. And so what you really have to do and what we do in the space is it's really it's historical information. It's based on your symptoms. I mean, women if you listen to women, they know. I mean, they are telling you the truth. They are telling you what's happening. And so perimenopause, again, there's a lot of stuff out there. Can I have blood tests done to determine I'm in perimenopause? And you don't need them. It's based on your symptoms. And you might get information that doesn't make much sense to you when you do check them, depending on when you have them checked. It could show, actually, they could show that it looks like you're in menopause and you're just because your estrogen level during your cycle can be very low. And then you get a period. So like there's a lot of money being made. You don't really need the hormone levels.
Hi, it's Cheryl Ann. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas I share on this show are things I also can help you implement? If you want me in your corner helping you find more time for what fills you up, go to brilliant-balance.com/schedule and sign up for a free exploratory call. Give yourself this time. You'll be so glad you did.
I might be wrong about this, but this is an aha for me of what you're saying is really what we're doing when we're saying people want treatment or support through this. What we're really saying is we want support for symptoms. And so if you're not having any symptoms and you're kind of feeling fine, there is no reason to go do a damn thing. But if you are feeling rocked by symptoms, whatever they are, there may be support available once a proper physician is able to say, okay, this symptom, here's what we do for you, because your reason for experiencing it might be slightly different than the next person's. Is that
right?
Okay.
100%.
So that's really important. If you, like, again, people listening, you know, if you've been walking around saying to your husband, saying to your sister, saying to whoever, like, God, these 3 or 4 things are just happening and I don't know what to do about them. It's, you know, like we were saying, hot flashes, night sweats, belly bloat, weight gain, mood swings, sleep issues, thinning hair. If you've got kind of
joint pain, anxiety, palpitations. I mean, there's so many things. Brain fog, I see in there. Absolutely. Right. I mean, and the problem is this is historically why women have just got shafted in the healthcare system because they just get patted on the back. Oh, you're anxious or you're having brain fog. Like you just need sleep or there's nothing wrong with you. Like, and so minimizes it as opposed to saying, gosh, you know, this is, and I say it all the time, the perimenopause is bumpy and it gets better on the other side. I mean, that's what also you have to hear, which is when you're on the postmenopausal side and your hormone levels aren't all over the place, they're consistently low, you do start to feel better. There is definitely another side. Now, yeah, I mean, the wrinkling gets worse and you still have the abdominal body shape change that is very weird and you don't like. And the hair thinning is, I mean, we're doing more and learning more is real. Because again, you have to remember, I mean, we are aging, right? Like, you know, you're 48, I'm 60, there's a difference. Yeah. I've been postmenopausal for 9.5 years now, right? Yep. But the symptoms during the perimenopause, they can be treated. And I would also just say, when there's all this debate about hormones, I want women to hear that in the perimenopause, when your ovaries are still working, they're not working great, but they're often producing high levels of hormones that then they stop and you have days when there's none around. I mean, it's this whole thing. But you're still making estrogen, sometimes even more estrogen than you were making in the 20s and 30s. That's a time when oral contraceptives are fantastic, right? And so why is that? And you have to think in like for women who have an IUD in or women who've had an endometrial ablation, like, you know, you're thinking, but I'm having all these symptoms, like what's the oral contraceptive going to do? Well, the gist is this, which is you need contraceptive levels of hormones and we have much lower doses of pills now. But what you're trying to do is actually suppress those ovaries, which is what we do when we're using them for birth control. Just we want to make them go to sleep so they're quiet. And then what we're doing is just giving even doses of hormones back. So this when we do continuous oral contraceptives where you're running pills without the placebo, women feel so much better because all of a sudden their hormones are even. And the question comes up all the time about breast cancer risk. And the issue is this, which is, and I'm big in this space, which is you have to know your own breast cancer risk, your baseline risk related to your genetics and your breast density and your reproductive factors. And women don't generally have a great idea of that because we don't educate them about that. But we're not giving you additional hormones in that period of time. We're actually often, when we give you the low dose pills, it's actually less hormones, right? And so again, don't be afraid of oral contraceptives for the majority of people. Again, there's always reasons where women can't take oral contraceptives, but in general, those are so helpful for perimenopausal symptoms. And we generally continue them until 50 or 51, when we would then, most women will be postmenopausal then and transition to low dose menopausal hormone therapy for symptomatic women.
Amazing. I mean, I think when I'm listening, and I'm listening on behalf of the listeners, like, how simple, right? What a simple thing. We're not talking about massive treatment protocols here. We're talking about very simple things that are fairly readily accessible. Like, this is not like a super hard thing to go get. Virtually everyone has a doctor that they can go to say, this is something that I would like to try. So I think if we're dealing with maybe a physician who is not as educated in this arena as you are there, I'm stop short of scripting, but are there things that you could give people to say that would help them get to what they need? Is it simply talking about low dose birth control?
Yeah. I mean, for perimenopausal symptoms, right? Like, I mean, just asking the question of the physician, I've been reading about this, or I've listened to podcasts about this, and I hear that maybe low dose oral contraceptives would help my symptoms, right? I mean, ask the question. And if the physician isn't comfortable with the discussion, and again, generally, if you're 40 to 42, you're still very connected to your OBGYN, and they are expert in prescribing contraceptives. So again, it's using your voice and talking to them. So you should be able to get low dose oral contraceptives for sure. But I think some of it is, right? Well, that's right. But some of it is, I think women now in their 40s, they're not seeing their OB as much because they're not having babies anymore, right? And the pap smear guidelines have changed, and you're getting your annual mammogram, but you don't know that your symptoms could be treated by low dose oral contraceptives. So you're not necessarily thinking that your hair thinning and your belly bloat and your fatigue is what you should, joint pain, talk to your OBGYN about, right? So you may end up in your primary care doctor's office who says, oh, it's fine. Your lab work is fine. There's nothing wrong, and aren't as comfortable with low dose oral contraceptives in women in their 40s, which they should be. But again, I see a lot of women who get blown off.
I mean, and it's heartbreaking, but so true. The concept, you've said it a few times, of sort of getting patted on the head and like dismissed or diminished, I think is very real. And then not to mention the dynamics of a lot of women don't feel assertive in a physician's office. There's a big power dynamic, particularly how long you've been seeing that person or what their gender or kind of power dynamics are. It can be a pretty intimidating environment. So learning to have notes written to ourselves that you're going to kind of work from. I have, my girls are 13 and 18, and I am already training them to speak for themselves in their physician's appointments, right? And I'm like, I'm here to back you up, but I really want you saying, because we have to learn how to talk to these physicians like they're humans and not, authority figures per se.
Right. Absolutely. The other thing that happens with women in their 40s, right, is just like you're busy with your kids and you're busy with your career, and you're taking care of everyone else though. And so women don't prioritize their own health care often as much as everyone else's in their family. And because they still are pretty healthy, right? I mean, if you're healthy, you're good, right? You're in your 40s, you get your mammogram. I think there is a part where not only do you have to be aggressive in speaking your mind or speaking up in the doctor's office, you have to get to the doctor's office. You have to value your own symptoms enough to say, I don't feel right. I really should make time to go see the doctor myself. And I really do want to go in with that list of symptoms and really advocate for myself, because again, we do such a good job teaching young women about puberty, and there's lots of books about what to expect when you're expecting and all of that, right? We haven't done this is again, and there's some ageism in it as well, right? So you're not as beautiful as you used to be, and whatever, and so the whole thing gets minimized, and women do need to just advocate for themselves and take better care of themselves.
Well, this is a very strong community who I believe will do what we're suggesting. So I think we're going to see a lot of people heading in for appointments kind of armed with what to say. while we're waiting for those appointments or in addition to any kind of medical intervention, are there other things that we can do that are maybe more lifestyle based that help to ease some of these symptoms?
For sure. And let me just start by saying, I tell my patients when they come in, don't do what I do all the time, do what I say, right? Because I'm not the best at living exactly the way that I would encourage everyone to. But I think what I tell my patients and in the 40s, and I would tell all of your listeners, that the most important time for all of us to impact how long we're going to live, how healthy we're going to be as we age, what we're going to die of. The most important time is between 40 and 60, right? And that's the time when you have the least contact with physicians. And in our current healthcare delivery system, when you do see a physician, you're generally there for a sinus infection. And again, you kind of get a script for an antibiotic and you're out the door. And no one's really talking about what everyone should be doing at midlife. And I can't emphasize enough how important healthy lifestyle habits are. I mean, it is eating well. And we can talk about what that means. Limiting alcohol, not smoking, absolutely prioritizing exercise. And there has to be cardio with weight bearing, particularly as we age, right? And starting with that, we can get into, what supplements do you need and all of that kind of stuff. And I can give you my personal opinion about that. But the basic lifestyle of those things, and I would add in there stress management too, and really, depending on if it's meditation or intentional breathing, whatever you do for your relaxation. And it's sleep is the other thing, is really prioritizing sleep. Like these things, and when I say that, so why is it so important? Because all of the things that you're doing between 40 and 60 have a huge impact on cardiovascular risk, diabetes risk, dementia risk, and cancer, right? So like we don't spend enough time, particularly with breast cancer too, talking about the benefit of diet. I mean, the data is overwhelming about really eating a whole food, plant-based diet as kind of the goal. Now, I will tell you, I don't have a perfect diet, right? I do eat red meat occasionally, and I do eat French fries occasionally, and I do eat pizza. I like pizza. I do eat ice cream occasionally, right? I don't have a perfect diet, but what I tell patients is if you can even shift it a little bit towards a more Mediterranean diet and eat more fruits and vegetables, just even incremental things. And even midlife women are often socializing. Their kids are in college now. They're going out more. They're drinking much more alcohol than they used to. And there's a direct correlation between alcohol risk and breast cancer risk, right? So there's just a whole lot of things that women should be doing to take care of themselves. That's so important that we don't spend enough time talking about.
I want to double click on these practices. First of all, I'm smiling because these are the same practices that I have a program called 30 Days to Vibrant Energy that we've had for years, and it's folded into our new program called Revive. And these are the practices that we are so emphatic about because I think we just know instinctively they make us feel better, right? But I'd love to get your point I want to refine a couple of these. So I heard eat well, limit alcohol, exercise, both cardiovascular and weight bearing, stress management, sleep. And I think you said one more that I might have missed. If anybody caught it, let me know.
Non-smoking, no smoking.
Non-smoking, that's it. So let's talk about, in terms of eating well, you said whole foods, plant-based. So kind of the Mediterranean diet, if people want to Google something, that's going to be the one that's probably most closely aligned. We're really talking about less processed foods in general.
Less animal protein. Is really key. Shifting away from animal protein, and really one of the big things that's come out now with microbiome data, right, is the importance of beans. Like I have a colleague at the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville that's just an amazing woman who's all about nutrition and cancer prevention. You should actually have her on the show. But she really will tell you that the data is so strong about trying to get a cup of beans in a day. Now, I can tell you I never get a cup of beans in a day. I get beans in once a week, but it should be, all different kinds of beans, right, are very, very healthy. But it's, again, shifting that simple things is less red meat during the week, less animal protein during the week. Like even if you have one night a week where you do a vegetarian meal, like anything. And then more leafy greens, more plants in your diet. So like tricks that I tell patients that I try to do as well is, on the weekends when you have more time, if you're busy during the week, right? Make a big salad that you can eat every time you come home, right? Cut up and make baggies of cut up vegetables that you can take and snack on, right? Like it's just simple stuff, because the data on diet and disease prevention is overwhelming.
Huge. And I think also just how you feel. Like if we're talking about this symptom management, like the number of women who, when we get them drinking more water, sparkling, regular, it doesn't matter, like get more water, more hydration, and a shift toward this kind of food. Like there's just instant energetic benefits. It does help with some of this belly bloating. Like there's immediate kind of benefits. I want to talk about alcohol because it's a hot topic.
Yeah.
So when you say limit alcohol, what are the guidelines?
Well,
not rules.
So that's right. So the guidelines used to be, and I think they're changing now, that, 1 glass of red wine for heart health was actually okay. I can tell you, if you talk to many people in the nutrition and cancer prevention space, that there's no safe amount of alcohol for women. Right. The spike occurs at about 3 alcoholic drinks per week. So it's not very much, right? Like it's really not. And when I talk to patients, and, I try to do this myself, but I was just at a big family wedding for the weekend. I had a lot of alcohol in 4 days at this big celebration, right? But in general, trying to not drink during the week and only have wine when you're out to dinner on the weekends. I mean, to really try to get it down, because I have many patients who really do have 2 glasses of wine every single night. And I don't focus on them having an alcohol problem when they come in, because they don't have an alcohol problem, but it's like, I want you to drink less for your health benefits, right? This is, never mind cirrhosis. Yeah. The less, the better.
When I took a group to Canyon Ranch, the thing that it's a dry resort, and the thing that I'm so they do mocktails with meals. And I think embracing the mocktail as a way to kind of create a bridge, if you like that celebratory beverage idea or something that feels, and also I think some of the non-alcoholic wines are getting a lot better.
That's so interesting that you say that. I mean, I've tried a couple of the non-alcoholic wines, and because I really do like to sit and have a glass of wine, right? That I like that with a meal. Ritual. But they haven't tasted very good. But I have heard that there are many new, they're getting better. They're getting better, many new ones. So I will try that.
It's finding your way to if the ritual is important. And again, I'm looking for how do we move the needle in big ways? If you can drink less during the week, you're going to sleep better, which is going to cause you, and also you're going to make better choices around food. So just the kind of domino effect of a couple of root causes and what it can really enable for us, I think is so critical. And you talked about exercise. We'll hit all these things. I'll underscore them in the show notes, because I think it's so critical that we give women really practical things without overwhelming them. So you said this a couple times. I'm going to underline it. This isn't an all or nothing. This isn't go change 10 things overnight. Just nudge a couple things in the direction that you're trying to go. Nudge one thing at a time, and I'm always saying 1 is greater than 0. So we want to be moving in these directions so that we feel better, right? We're trying to work on symptom management here. And I think it's so great that you talked on other health conditions that correlate with this life stage. Certainly breast cancer is one. None of us have been untouched by this in our lives. We all know people, you're someone.
Friends, family members.
Right.
I mean,
So of course we want to do the things to keep ourselves as healthy as possible through this 40 to 60 life stage that you're telling us is so critically important. Are there any blessings or things to look forward to in this stage of life that you've really noticed among your patient base or yourself?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's bumpy in the perimenopause. I would say that, that is probably the harder time. When you are on the other side, there is some kind of peace and acceptance that does come again. And I think, it's hard to tease out what is aging versus what's very clearly, and migraines are a really good example of this, which we know what happens to postmenopausal women. Their migraines get vastly better. And why is that? Because their hormones are low, but they're even, right? It's the swings in hormones. Many women in the perimenopause are having a terrible time with migraines, but the even consistency of the hormones after menopause, I will tell you, you do feel better. And there is it's hard to know. Is it your children being grown up? And I have all kinds of things I could tell you about the difference in the way I feel between 50 and 60. But there is some peace and some acceptance and, renewed gratitude, and all kinds of things that come with aging that is very positive.
And they may be less physical, right? The things that you're naming,
yes.
and I say my observations of women in that life stage is there's a deep sense of gratitude. There's a lot of wisdom kind of exuding. There's a sense of knowing themselves that's different than some of this upheaval. But the reminder that I've heard you say in various ways today that we are in an upheaval. This is a tumultuous chapter physically and emotionally, akin to adolescence. Like we went through this once, we're kind of doing a second round, and being patient and graceful with ourselves through that and knowing that there is some help that we can get, like there are some things you can do, I think is very reassuring to someone who's sitting in the middle of this.
I would say one thing that I see with women at the early perimenopause stage as well, it's, the end of childbearing. It really is this either very clear decision that you're not having more kids for many women, or it's, you were trying and your fertility has changed and you're struggling. But there is a very important life stage that I see that with that, however it becomes final that you're not having kids, that represents a big shift into a different phase of life. And then you're having all this hormonal instability, and it is really bumpy. I can tell you it's bumpy because you have teenage kids at home. You've been married for 20 years and, it's just challenging being married and raising kids. And and your hormones are bumpy and you're not sleeping well and you don't feel the way you did when you were 30. And it just is bumpy. It gets much better. It does, but it takes time. And I would also say that in the postmenopause, it's kind of like men, right? Men don't have these hormonal swings. It's not that we're crazy. We're just different than men. I mean, we are physiologically different down to every single cell and every single hormonal state that we've been in our entire lives. And again, we're more like men in terms of our hormonal milieu being very constant after menopause. And so men have no idea what we go through. They just
That's why
don't.
there's dismissiveness. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the science is real. It's real.
Well, and thank God for female physicians like you leading the way on this, because I do think that's been the game changer, is you had women who chose to say, this is my area of expertise. I'm sure you have male colleagues, but I feel confident that
actually, it's so interesting what's happened in our menopause organization actually now. So when I started 30 years ago, really being involved in it, right, it was still mostly men, male OBGYNs. And I can tell you right now on the board, we can't find a male physician to bring on the board, like in terms of diversity and inclusion. Like the OBGYN residencies now have gone to across the US. I mean, it's almost 90% women now. It's just, which is great. But I actually do think men bring something very important to the science and to the table. And I wish that there were some men involved in this, but it really has become very, very female. One of the reasons nobody really is interested in this space, though, is again because there's no money in doing menopausal medicine. There's no money.
Not enough money in this. Yeah,
not enough money in this, and so people don't want to do it. It's not a lucrative subspecialty. So
I get that, and yet I think that just triples our gratitude to those of you who are really at the forefront and leading the way. So, Lisa, tell me where we can send people to find your practice, which I'm sure has lists of other resources they can get to from there.
For sure. So my practice is in Cincinnati for those, or most of your.
They'll be all over, but there will be some. Yeah.
So I kind of wear two hats. So I have my concierge medicine of Cincinnati. So let me talk to you about that. So personally, and my providers were all women's health people certified by the North American Menopause Society. And we do both longitudinal primary care, but also consultative women's health. So again, for your listeners, again, I'm licensed in like 10 states now, so I can do telemedicine consults in those states. But in Cincinnati, I see patients, about 30% of my practice is really women who have a different primary care doctor who want to come 1 or 2 times and see me to really get help or get advice or get guidance, right? So all of my practitioners here in Cincinnati do that. But where I would direct those of you not in Cincinnati is to, again, the website is not the new website and the new name change is not live. So right now it's menopause.org, but it's the North American Menopause Society. And on that website is a list of what we call menopause certified clinicians, so NCMP clinicians. And I would really have you look in your community if you're struggling to find an NCMP. So the NCMP certification can be an internal medicine or family medicine physician, or it can be an OBGYN. It's our organization is very multidisciplinary. And so again, but that's a good credential to have if you're looking. Now, I will tell your viewers too, there's a lot of companies. So one of the things that menopause has come to the forefront, and again, because of the business of medicine, there's money to be made, right? So there's a lot of startups in the space, and a lot of now post-COVID, the telemedicine world has really grown dramatically. So there's a lot of companies out there that are offering virtual visits, virtual menopause care. And although many of them, I know the founders, I know what they're doing, I will just tell you that again, there's a couple pitfalls with those, I would say, most of them. One is the problem is it's all virtual. So what I worry about is women will get a consult, say, get started on hormone therapy virtually, haven't really been in. And the big picture for them is still missed, right? Which is they haven't had a breast cancer risk assessment done, so they have no idea. They may be carrying a hereditary cancer mutation. They may need enhanced screening for their breast or OPS. What if they start bleeding? They still need to go to someone. They don't have an in-person care, right? So it's kind of still fragmented. And I worry that there's the opportunity for women to get bad care or delay in diagnosis of something else. So like just consumers beware.
It could be in partnership though. Like you could say, I have a physician I see locally and I want expertise in this particular area via telemedicine.
Yes. So you certainly can do a consult. One of the things I would just caution though too is what I've seen happen in many of the companies is they morph into, again, to make their bottom line. Now they're selling stuff too. So you can't really get out of there. And some of the stuff, again, I would say I just shake my head because I understand why it happens because it's how you make the company profitable and move forward. But not all of it's often with these, it can be not evidence-based stuff. And when it really comes to supplements, most of the time, I would say supplements are, the data does not support that they're helpful really for menopausal symptoms, right? So you can try them. I generally think that they're safe, but where it becomes confusing is in women like me with a history of breast cancer or with other health conditions on medications, where the supplements are not studied for drug-drug interactions. You can't guarantee safety and purity. So it's a little bit like I'm just afraid that there are circumstances where women might be harmed and not realize that they're being harmed. So it's the telemedicine is really important because there are areas of the country and there's access issues and not everyone is able to get menopausal care from someone that's an expert. So those telemedicine companies really do provide that. But again, I just worry a little bit that there's, again, the potential
it's not perfect, unless we're lucky enough to be in a city where we can see somebody like you, some people are going to have to cobble together maybe a little bit of a solution. Right. And you're saying proceed with caution, like make sure you're staying just for yourself
and advocating for yourself. And I would really tell everyone to advocate for their health between 40 and 60. When I have my 97-year-old patient and my 86-year-old patients, which I have, right? Adjusting their blood pressure medicines or their diabetes medication, like the impact I'm having on their life is like minuscule, right? But identifying a woman in her 40s who carries a hereditary cancer mutation, I can save someone's life, or getting them to drink less alcohol so they don't develop breast cancer and eat better. That's a game changer in terms of your life expectancy, right? So again, it really is such a critical time for women to be engaged in their health.
Amazing. I am assuming that at your site that people can see which states you are licensed to do telemedicine.
Yes. Yes,
Great.
For sure.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It was absolutely so enlightening, and you're just such a clear expert. So thank you for your time and your investment.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay, my friends, thank you for listening today. Listen, I hope you got as much out of this episode as I did. And if you know someone who has been talking about this with you and you want to put this episode in her hands, please, by all means, do that. Just find a way within whatever service you use to listen to these podcasts to forward this particular episode directly to a friend. If you're having a hard time doing that, you can always go to our website, brilliant-balance.com/podcast. There is a page for each and every episode of the show, and you can forward that webpage, which is a pretty simple way to get it into someone's hands. So that's my challenge for you today is who else do you know that needs to hear what Dr. Larkin had to share with us today? And please go ahead and put that information, pay it forward into someone's hands who might not have had the chance to listen just yet, who you know will really benefit. And that is all for today, my friends. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.